DC is part of Book TV's college series. It's about half an hour.
And Book TV is on location at American University in Washington, D.C. And we're pleased to be joined here by Professor Akbar Ahmed, Professor of Islamic Studies at American University. His most recent book is The Thistle and the Drone, How America's War on Terror Became a Global War on Tribal Islam. Dr. Ahmed, is America's global war on terrorism, is it a clash of civilizations or a clash of religions?
I would say, Peter, that it's more complex. I find these concepts, the clash of civilizations, and other concepts related to this rather simplistic. And by now, that's 10 years, more than 10 years after 9/11, we should be aware of the complexity of what's happening on the ground abroad, where America is involved in various wars. I find in this particular study that many of these conflicts are rooted in the clash already taking place before 9/11 between central governments and the tribes and communities on their peripheries, on the borders, on the interstices between states. So therefore, without an understanding of local culture, local history, it's impossible to impose these simplistic notions. Now, I know that we here in the United States think of this as a clash of civilizations, but talk to an Afghan or someone in Waziristan or someone in Somalia or Yemen, and they will just look aghast at the concept that there's a clash of civilizations. 90% of a survey in Afghanistan, of Afghans surveyed, had no idea what 9/11 was or who Osama bin Laden was. So therefore, we have to be very careful of how we are analyzing the contemporary world. And I maintain that there's a crisis already existing in those parts of the world where the United States has now drifted into and got involved in local conflicts.
So, Ambassador Ahmed, do locals in Afghanistan, different tribes, do they see the U.S. as attacking their personal tribe, or do they see their own Afghanistan government?
Peter, you have now raised a very important question. You raised a third actor. So you have the United States, you have the tribes. You've now raised the idea of the central government as a third place. So now you have a triangle of conflict. And that is the complexity in the discussion that is often overlooked. Now, when you include the central government, then you know that the central government has its own relationship with its own periphery. And very often, it's a troubled one. Go right through the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, and you'll find this pattern. If the central government is tolerant and open and inclusive and gives its citizens the rights they deserve to freedom, to education, to health, to job opportunities, there's no problem. But if it represses and suppresses and brutalizes its own population, you will have problems. Whether it's Iraq under Saddam Hussein, whether it's Syria, where you're seeing this brutalization of Assad's own people by him, you see the same pattern. Gaddafi dealing with especially the eastern tribes, the Benghazi people. So the pattern exists throughout the case studies that we've looked at, and we've looked at 40 case studies. So it really makes it a global study of what is going on in the world.
Akbar Ahmed, if you would take Pakistan as a case study and walk us through the different tribes and the situation in your home country.
Pakistan is a central piece of this study. Why? Because Waziristan, which is in the tribal areas, is one of the most targeted places on earth for the drone program. Waziristan is also one of the most highly tribal societies on the face of this earth, and it's traditionally never been completely conquered or subdued or incorporated into any government. It is part of Pakistan, and yet it maintains, the tribes maintain their own independence with great pride, with the great pride in their own culture and in their own traditions. Now, what they're finding, I'm talking of the ordinary tribesmen, not the bad guys. What the ordinary tribesman finds, Peter, and think about it, put yourself in the shoes of the tribesman, like Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. Get under the skin of that person and walk about. One day, he's being blown up by helicopters and artillery. Next day by these crazy suicide bombers. The third day by tribal rivals. The fourth day by drone strikes. And in complete desperation, he sends his family out of Waziristan. So huge chunks of Waziristan are living in cities as destitute refugees. And they say every day is like 9/11 for us. So again, go back to the man in the village, and particularly the impact on women and children, Peter. Whatever the debate about drones, remember there's a moral and humanitarian dimension which is often missing in the debate. The impact on women and children is devastating, and this has been documented in studies like the recent study by Stanford and New York University.
Dr. Ahmed, you mentioned drones, and a lot of your book, your newest book, The Thistle and the Drone, talks about the drone situation, a big debate right now in Washington. What's the view of drones in these tribal areas, Afghanistan, Pakistan?
Again, Peter, you use the word debate. There is a debate in the United States. It's just beginning. It's just starting, and it'll pick up. But a debate implies two opposing points of view. The debate in America is very one-sided. You only hear one side. I would like to hear Yemenis, Somalis, Pakistanis, Kurds from East Turkey who are also victim to the drone strikes. What are they saying and how are they responding to the drones? We don't hear their voices. Well, in this book, we do hear their voices. And what they're saying is that life for us is sheer hell. What have we done to deserve this? They're literally saying this. We have Wazir authors being quoted who I'm in touch with, who said this is like a genocide. How are we to blame for some crazy guys who did something on 9/11? And it's all being visited on us. These are very impoverished areas. Literacy rates, facilities like health and education are they're non-existent. They're not, I wouldn't say barely existent, they're non-existent. And on top of that, you have this violence that's inflicted on them. So you can imagine the despair and desperation. From that, you have the breakdown of the traditional structures. This is very important, Peter, to understand. Tribal society rests on three pillars: tribal leadership based in genealogy, religious leadership, and central government authority. All three pillars stand demolished in Waziristan. And the people who've targeted them are these suicide bombers. They have killed something like 400 elders of Waziristan. Peter, that is decapitating an entire society. Literally, it's like knocking off someone's head, because it's a headless society now. Now, in that society, along comes the drone. What do you expect the next generation to be doing? And you have drones, the suicide bombers now blowing themselves up in schools, in mosques, in bus stops. It's completely a breakdown of society, and it's affecting a big nation. Pakistan is a nation of 185 million people. It's nuclear, and it is very troubled about the idea of the drone. Apart from talk of sovereignty and violating national borders, etc., is the moral dimension that has upset and has really agitated people.
Ambassador Ahmed, you talk about President Obama having a love of drones.
Well, these are the reports that are published about President Obama's relationship with the drone. This was a Rolling Stone article which we quoted. And it certainly seems that after his coming in, though I would have thought with his temperament, he's a scholarly man, he's a thoughtful man, a compassionate man, I would have thought that he would have handled it slightly differently. But the drone use has gone up exponentially, in fact, and their impact on those societies that I'm covering in this book has been devastating. So somewhere we need to connect the dots. Somewhere we need to say people who are pressing the button somewhere in the Midwest or in the far West in the United States and across the world, entire families and communities and women and children, people going to a funeral, people going to a wedding party are being blown up. And then here we say collateral damage. There are no civilians being killed. We need to connect these two very different worlds and say, ultimately, is this what we, the United States of America, is this what we stand for? Is this what we are exporting to the world?
So how do we connect those dots in your view?
I think the debate has to begin, and the debate has to be multidimensional. It has to be more than just about security and about legality. It is that, it's very important, those are crucial elements in any society, but the United States also stands for morality, ethics, the vision of the founding fathers, a certain kind of society, a civilization, civility itself. Washington's only book has the title Civility in it. So these are crucial facets and features of the American vision. And I believe at its most profound, they are challenged. And I think that debate will come.
Does the U.S., in your view, Professor, have legitimate security concerns
It
for
does.
the use of drones?
It does, Peter, because the United States was hit on 9/11. There's no doubt about it. Completely out of the blue, one fine morning, as it were. And it has every right to be concerned. It has taken every kind of precaution, rightly, and has maintained that high level of security. Its ambassadors have been killed. Recently, we saw this extraordinary, accomplished diplomat killed in Benghazi. And therefore, we need to be concerned about it. At the same time, the United States is more than just one aspect of its concerns about security. It represents something much bigger. And on the global stage, Peter, to me at least, the United States symbolizes something that I think very few countries symbolize. And that is a vision of the world, a vision of society itself, which is different from other societies. And that is essentially compromised when you have these killings which do not accept the normal processes of law and end up by very often killing many, many more people than the so-called bad guys.
Ambassador Akbar Ahmed is a professor of Islamic Studies here at American University. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a visiting professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, formerly served as Pakistan's High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland, the author of several books. Professor Ahmed, are you a member of a tribe from your home country in Pakistan?
Peter, that's a very interesting question. I had to ask that question myself as an anthropologist. You know, I'm professionally an anthropologist, and it's critical to lay it out there for the reader so everyone knows their prejudices. My mother, yes, is a Pushtun, a Pathan, so I have blood of the Pathan. My father belongs to a sacred lineage. His ancestry goes back, in fact, to the Holy Prophet in Islam. And the two I've always found are very interesting in my makeup. So on the one hand, there's the warrior, there's the man of action, and on the other hand, the person who would want peace and create goodwill and bring people together and compassion, more thoughtful and even more mystical. And sometimes these two are in conflict in me, and I see this in me. So I found that when I was doing this study, I was able to get under the skin of the tribal peoples, because that is also part of my heritage. But I could also reach beyond that and transcend that to reach out and find ways of bringing peoples together, because it isn't just one point of the triangle I talked about. It's also bringing in the central government and the United States and the tribal peoples and their elders, so that somehow together a dialogue begins and a solution is found to the predicament that the United States finds itself today.
What's the role, though, of Pakistan as kind of a manufactured geographically country? Should it be split up? Does it need to remain a nation of tribes?
Well, you know, Peter, if you go to any nation, whether it's Pakistan or Iraq, many of these nations are, as you said, just put together after the Second World War. These are really modern states. They have an ancient history. Pakistan goes back thousands of years. But they have a modern history as a modern state, a recent history. Once they're made, it's very difficult to unmake them unless there's an internal crisis, as took place in Pakistan in 1971. And Pakistan has to be very careful, Peter. Pakistan has to be very careful because there are internal tensions today. And some of these are exacerbated by these drone strikes, because right now the tribal areas are in flames. Pakistan has lost something like 35 to 40,000 people. The army is involved. Every day you'll read in the news 20 soldiers killed, 15 soldiers killed by the suicide bombers. They in turn fight their own people, and there's a conflict, Muslims fighting Muslims, killing Muslims. It's internally creating a lot of tension in society. There's tension in Balochistan. The government is not particularly popular. It's not seen as particularly competent. So there are all kinds of internal tensions. Then recently there was some tension with India on the borders, soldiers being killed on both sides. And we have to always remember that this is a part of the world, Peter, which combined is 1.5 billion people. That's 1/4 of humanity. Both India and Pakistan are nuclear. They fought 3 wars. So I think the United States, being a key ally of Pakistan, right now Pakistan is a major non-NATO ally in terms of status. The interest of the United States is to keep Pakistan steady, to make sure that the features, the institutions, the foundations of democracy are strong, that a good, clean leadership emerges, and that the people of Pakistan are involved in the processes of law, of decision making, of democracy.
At what point, Professor, in your view, did U.S. policy in Afghanistan, troops in Afghanistan, did it go awry?
I think, Peter, initially the intention was good, both in Afghanistan and for all the cynicism about Iraq. I think there was a great desire to promote democracy and so on. I think where it went awry was the fact that American troops arrived with very little knowledge of those societies. So I take a slightly different analysis. And remember, I've been in the field, I've been an administrator, I've run Waziristan, and very successfully. We tackled problems which were major problems, retrieving murderers and bad guys, etc., across the borders without having to start using heavy artillery. Where we went wrong, I believe, is had we known a bit more about the cultures, the languages, the sensitivities, it would have made the task much, much easier for us. And that happened. You know, the famous surge in Iraq or the attempts in Afghanistan, they really were a result of some extraordinary soldiers, like General McChrystal, for example, who began to understand after years in the field in Afghanistan that this method, this straightforward confrontation, will not work. This is a nation that has seen some of the greatest conquerors of history come and go, and they've not been defeated. Recently, they saw the British Empire in Afghanistan ultimately defeated, the Soviets defeated. So what made us assume that we are so different that we will deny or reverse history itself? At great cost to themselves, the Afghans will fight. They're a fiercely independent people, fiercely independent. They'll fight with each other, or foreigners or invaders. So had we understood the mechanics, the culture, I think we could have handled it very differently, and then promoted what needed to be promoted and strengthened our own impact and footprint in Afghanistan. Education, health schemes, reaching out to these local communities, local government, all these are wanted by the Afghans. They would welcome Americans doing this. I was, Peter, educated at an American college in Lahore, Foreman Christian College, run by American Presbyterians. We've produced several presidents of Pakistan, foreign ministers, members of parliament. Every one of us is so grateful to the American teachers who taught us. So why couldn't we give colleges and schools, instead of wasting, I don't know, billions and billions and billions in wars which in the end resulted in the Afghans hating us?
Ambassador Ahmed, you write in the Thistle and the Drone about a recent survey of American and Afghan soldiers. This is how the Afghans view the Americans. They always shout and yell MFer. They are crazy. U.S. soldiers swear at us constantly, saying F you. Their arrogance sickens us. They don't care about civilian casualties. They pee all over right in front of civilians, including females, etc.
Well, yeah, and Peter, quote what the Americans thought of the Afghans.
And I can go to that next, and this is what the Americans thought of the Afghan forces. They are turds. We are better off without them. I don't trust locals. They can be sleepers. I would never like to admit that Iraqis are smarter, but they are Einsteins compared to Afghans. These guys only seem to care about their own tribes or families.
Tribes, back to the tribe. They're right. So you see how interesting this is. An American survey conducted in Washington, authoritative survey. And this gives us an insight into two allies. Remember, these are two sets of soldiers who are working together, shoulder to shoulder, whose job should be to protect each other, who have nothing but obvious contempt for each other. And that alarmed me, because after a decade, Peter, if you're not able to make friends in the very people who you've invested billions of dollars, you know, the Americans have spent all this money trying to build up the security forces and the army, so that when America leaves Afghanistan, these Afghan troops will take over, the Afghan army and the Afghan police. And if this is what they're thinking of, the Americans, ask yourself the question, what is the legacy we're leaving behind?
I want to go back to one of our original questions. Do the Afghans understand why American soldiers are in their country?
No. I gave you the survey. A lot of them believe. There are all kinds of theories. Remember that. I mean, that part of the world, including Pakistan, including the Middle East, is a great area for conspiracy theory. So, you know, some will say it's access to the Central Asian gas and oil fields, some will say mineral resources, some will say geopolitics. Very few will say that this is because of the good intentions of the Americans in promoting democracy. So they will have a lot of very mixed responses. My own belief is, after the study, that the Afghans, the Pakistanis, genuinely don't understand why the Americans are not there. They need to be there. That's a different issue, and I've always supported the presence of the United States. It's critical for the United States to have a presence there, considering the region. You have China on one side, India to the south, Russia emerging to the north. The United States just can't pack up and walk away. But are we able to convince the people there, our local hosts and potential allies, that we need to be there? That is the question. And that is where I believe there has been a failure.
But our footprint is going to be much smaller after 2014.
Well, that's again a choice we're making, and I'm not entirely happy. I would want a bigger footprint, but a different kind of footprint. I've mentioned this already, Peter. If you had colleges like the one I went to, which by the way is a university now, and they've opened up a women's wing, if you had 10 of these in Afghanistan spread throughout the tribal areas, think of the impact there. Think of the future generation. In one stroke, you're changing the direction of a nation. If we value education, knowledge, the law, a compassionate civil society, we must understand, Peter, so do the Afghans, so do the Pakistanis. We must try to convey this to them, not the fact that we just turn up with soldiers and guns and missiles and drones, because that will immediately have local society resisting. So the paradigm has to be thought out, and that paradigm can only be thought out if the debate begins. So I'm hoping that we will act as a catalyst to this debate.
Professor Ahmed, how does the Sunni Shiite issue that we've talked about for the last 10, 15 years play into this?
It does and it doesn't. It does in the sense that there is a large Shia minority in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, and they play a role. They play an important role in the army, in various institutions. It isn't out in the surface yet. It's still under the surface. But what the suicide bombers are doing and the Taliban are doing, because of their very extreme understanding of Sunni Islam, they're also targeting the Shia. For example, in Pakistan, in Quetta, where I was commissioner, they killed 100 Shia. Now that's appalling. That's a complete breakdown of law and order. No government can allow that, and yet it happened. So that's something that's simmering. Iran is a very strong, aggressive Shia power, and it has interest in the region. So again, it plays its own great game. That balance has to be kept. So if you have an understanding in terms of the region, I think it can be contained, the Shia-Sunni tension.
The country of Mali is emerging as a battleground.
Yes, again, it's in the book. Read the book. It has exactly the same paradigm. You have the Tuareg. You've been hearing about the tribes. These Tuareg are tribesmen like the Wazir tribesmen and Masood in Waziristan, and they have been marginalized. Their lands have been robbed. Their mineral resources have been stolen. They have been really treated as third-rate citizens on their own traditional lands by their central governments. So there comes a point when they say enough is enough, we are being killed and raped and tortured, we are going to react. And they react. Now unfortunately, this is not a very civilized or a very educated part of the world. These are tribesmen. Most of them are illiterate. They only act according to their own tribal codes. And the primary code is the law of revenge. So they go out and they go berserk. They're chopping people's hands and killing people, etc. The central government then responds with force. Western powers get involved, and very quickly the cycle begins again. And again, we are not understanding the dynamic. The dynamic is the center and the periphery. If you can help resolve that, you've solved the problem. If you can't resolve that, hammering them and throwing bombs at them is not going to resolve it, because the central conflict will remain untouched.
In your book, you also talk about the Philippines. What is going on there?
Philippines, again, same situation, exactly the same. The Tausig, a Muslim minority group up in the fringes in certain parts of the Philippines. Now, they've been independent for centuries, and they're seeing the same process. The central government coming in very aggressively, taking their lands, converting their lands into by settlers from outside into lands where suddenly they become a minority in their own lands. And in the Philippines, I found something interesting, Peter. The Philippines have taken an initiative to reach out to these tribal groups and bring them on board. And how did they do this? They simply negotiated. They said, okay, you want autonomy, you want to preserve your culture and your customs, fine. As long as you're not rebelling against the state, we have no objection. And just that simple initiative, that simple human act, and a remarkable general who actually stood up, a general, think of it, think of an American general doing this, in front of the Tausig population and actually apologized. He said, what we have done are atrocities and I apologize. And people were crying, and the mayor of the Tausig mayor was in tears, and that just calmed things down immediately. Because again, he reached out to the human side of the enemy. Again, walking with the skin, under the skin of the other side. If you do that, things suddenly start changing. And I think, Peter, we have to start using other paradigms in order to impose some sort of stability and law and order in these rather turbulent regions of the world.
What about the use of drones in the Philippines?
They've been used. They've been used. There's rumors, because remember, this whole drone program is covered with disinformation, obfuscation, vagueness, darkness, all kinds of clouds. Neither you nor I have any idea about this. So we do know that there have been reports, there have been write-ups that drones have been used there. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. And this is another tragedy, I think, of the present situation, that we can't say for certain. I asked, for this study, I asked some very distinguished senior Americans. I said, who's behind the creation of these militant suicide bombers in the tribal areas of Pakistan? And without thinking, they said, Pakistanis. And I said, but why would they be wanting to blow up their own schools and buses? He said, no, because they've got some bigger game. I asked Pakistanis the same question. Without hesitation, Peter, they said, Americans. Now, if this is the situation on the ground, where you have allies who don't trust each other, where you have the local people like the Afghans have no idea why the Americans are there and what they're doing there, you need a clarity of vision. And that must come from Washington. Why? This is the superpower. This is the power that's driving the world, in a sense, and driving this war on terror. What is the long-term vision of the United States for these societies? What does it want to communicate to them? And how is it going to set about doing this? That clarity will help. And you know, with light, darkness disappears. Right now, there's a lot of darkness around the drone program.
Professor Ahmed, where did the title, The Thistle and the Drone, come from?
Well, you know, Peter, I'm a professor on campus and I love ideas. Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, wrote a novella called Haji Murad, in which the character is accompanying the Russian Imperial Army in the Caucasus Mountains. And they're fighting these Muslim tribes. And he goes for a walk and he finds a flower, he plucks the flower, and it's a thistle. A thistle, as you know, is a very prickly flower. And he says these tribes are just like the thistle. And remember that the thistle is the symbol of Scotland. And I know Scotland, I know the Scots, I have great respect and affection for them. The Scots are very much like the thistle. They pride themselves on their culture, their traditions. You can't walk over them. They gave a very tough resistance to the English over history. And Western commentators have very often compared Muslim tribesmen to Scotsmen. So very often Western writers, I've quoted dozens, who would compare the Pushtun in Afghanistan and Pakistan, particularly in the tribal areas, to the Scots. They would say these are just like the Scots. They're like the thistle. They're prickly and they're hard and they're very fiercely independent. So I thought that the thistle represented one kind of society today in the 21st century, and the drone represents another kind of society. It is the ultimate killing machine of the age of globalization. It's sleek, you don't see it, you don't see when it's coming, who's behind it, why is it coming at all, is it coming at all, is even being denied it ever came. Very much like Wall Street, if you remember all the senior executives, you had no idea what they were doing, how they were doing it, whether you could even hold them up for retribution or for the process of law, and they got away with it. So you have one kind of society in confrontation with another kind of society. And again, I believe that these issues have to be discussed in the context of the age of globalization. We are living as a global society. Anything we do here in the United States has an impact over there, and vice versa. And therefore, this title, in a sense, tries to integrate the two.
And we have been talking with American University professor Akbar Ahmed about his most recent book, The Thistle and the Drone: How America's War on Terror Became a Global War on Tribal Islam. This is Book TV at American University.
Every weekend, Book TV